You're listening to the Murphology Podcast. Thanks for tuning in to the Murphology Podcast, aka Murph here, to share interviews about biking experiences from cyclists who have pedaled to places all over the U.S. Each week we will get to know new people and explore new destinations to ride your bike. As you listen to these adventures, you may wonder, why haven't I done that yet? Well, on the show today, we have Mark Piani. Hey, Mark, how are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. Well, we're recording this in mid-May, and unfortunately, we still are dealing with this pandemic and not being able to ride out in groups. And I think every county and city and state has different guidelines right now. So what's going on where you are?
I mean, the state guidelines around here are basically we're allowed to be, outside exercising with appropriate social distancing.
Mm-hmm.
The official word, like with masks and stuff, is you're supposed to wear masks, like if you go to the store or if you're in a place outdoors where you can't social distance.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been some people doing group rides. I personally doing all my riding solo because I think that's the way to go right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think the people that I've seen have been pretty responsible about, doing what they think is appropriate social distancing for riding in groups.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the basic thing here is as long as you're outside and you feel like you can social distance, we're allowed to, exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think it's a very good thing. I mean, I know, the whole kind of vibe has been, this stay-at-home order and stuff. I don't think it's very good for people to just shelter in place and be in their houses all the time.
Right.
I think it's actually mentally good for you to get outside. So
yeah, and the perfect example, I'm somebody who usually goes outside and rides my bike, I'd say 5 to 7 days a week. And the perfect example is if, it's a rainy day or terrible weather and I stay inside, I can tell. I can tell when my mood changes and I'm like, you know what I'm missing? I'm missing getting out and getting some exercise. So I'm just assuming people who are taking that social distancing maybe a little bit too literal and they're staying in their house, like, oh gosh, I hope they at least open their windows and get some fresh air.
yeah, I agree.
Well, you mentioned, what it's like where you live. Maybe give us a little bit more details about where you live and what cycling, maybe what it was like before this pandemic as far as the culture.
Sure. I live in a suburb of Chicago called Berwyn. People who are familiar with Chicago Oak Park, a lot of people know where that is. It's the suburb immediately south of Oak Park.
Okay.
So we're about 11 miles west of downtown. So we're kind of the first suburb west of the city of Chicago. There's been, they closed, one of the major attractions in the city, at least, is to ride the lakeshore.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the places that they closed. The mayor of Chicago closed, so you can't ride the lakefront. I think it's hard around here because, especially a lot of the trails, it's a densely populated area.
Mm-hmm.
When people want to get outside, that's one of the places that they go. I think they were having a lot of problems with people not being able to social distance. Being on the lakeshore, and there's another big trail. It's called the 606 that kind of runs east to west. Same deal. They had to close that down because people couldn't social distance. Further out towards me, there are a bunch of trails that are Cook County Forest Preserve trails. Cook County is the county that Chicago is in. They're open for now. However, they have said, that if they see there being a problem, they may close them. They've limited parking in certain parts of the forest preserve, so certain picnic areas and stuff are closed.
Mm-hmm.
So they're doing what they can to kind of limit traffic. But it's tricky because a lot of them butt up against residential areas, so they do get very crowded. So I've actually been doing most of my riding on the road.
Mm-hmm. And now is the good time to do that because there are less cars, at least in my area.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And I know for me, I mean, kind of like you, I ride, pretty much every day. And it's actually been the silver lining, I guess. It's actually been really good. I've been putting on a ton of miles. So I get out every single day and you can put on big miles because there's, like you said, the traffic is pretty light,
Mm-hmm.
so you can go and do your thing. And truthfully, sometimes when you're sticking to trails, it kind of limits you a little bit in in the amount of mileage that you can do, because you got to try to string it all. Like, at least around here, none of the trails are more than, maybe 10 miles long.
Okay.
So you gotta string together multiple little pieces of trail to be able to try to get a long distance.
Well, speaking of long distance, you mentioned that you're, getting a lot more miles than maybe if it was not in a pandemic environment. But I read somewhere that you're on a quest to pedal 10,000 miles.
Yeah, every year I've been putting on a little bit more miles, and there's a training app that some people use called Strava. You can set kind of a yearly goal, and it will tell you in that if you're ahead or behind what your goal was.
Mm-hmm.
And I set my goal at 8,000 because that's what I did last year. I kept seeing that I was way ahead of my pace to complete that goal. And so I was like, I wonder what would happen because that you hear about people doing 10,000 miles a year, which seems crazy,
Mm-hmm.
and so I just out of curiosity, I bumped it, my goal to 10,000, and I was still a little bit ahead of pace. And I was like, you know what?
Wow.
I bet I could do this. Like, I bet that I can get to 10,000 miles. So, but give it a try. I ride year round, outdoors. In the wintertime here, in Chicago, in the Midwest in general, rides in the winter generally tend to need to be shorter,
Right.
because the conditions are just not awesome to be outside for a long time on a bike. But yeah, I mean, I ride, pretty consistently every day, year round, unless it's in the winter super windy or sloppy with snow or
Mm-hmm.
whatever.
And I've had people say this several times, but basically, winter riding is more about the gear you wear, the clothing you wear, rather than the temperature outside. You can kind of adapt to almost anything. Would you say that's the case for you? Like, you have some good
Yeah, I
winter
think that's
gear?
absolutely true. I mean, I've done a bunch of camping, backpacking,
Hmm.
and that's kind of like the thing is like there's as long as you have the right gear with you, you'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
The big thing for me, like I was saying with the wind, is I don't like. I'll put it this way. A friend of mine said to me one time, it was kind of a nasty day outside, and he was wearing ski goggles, and he said to me, I don't ever do that. And he said to me, he's like, well, hey man, you need to get some ski goggles. And I just looked at him and I said, if I need to buy ski goggles, I'm going skiing. So that's kind of my thing. Like, if I have to cover every single inch of skin and wear ski goggles and stuff like that, there are other sports that I maybe should be doing instead.
That's funny. And I do own ski goggles, and I've only worn them a couple times because I feel silly. And like you mentioned, when it gets like, for me, it's below 20 degrees, especially if the wind kicks up, that I'm like, do I really need to go on a bike ride today?
Well, the wind is, for at least for me, the wind is really the limiting factor. I mean, if
Mm-hmm.
it's like you said, I mean, if it's 20, but it's calm outside, there's no problem.
Yeah.
If it's 30 and the wind is really gusting in your face, it's miserable. It's not fun. Your eyes are watering. And then it starts to get to that thing like, am I here to suffer or am I here to enjoy what I'm doing? Like,
Right.
this.
Right. Unless it'll turn into a really good story, it's not worth suffering.
Well, and it does sometimes turn into a good story. I have a great picture before all this. We went on a group ride, four of us, and there was a ton of snow on the ground, but it was, not too cold. So we stopped somewhere to grab a snack or whatever. And we're like, we should take pictures of our bikes, for putting a picture on Facebook or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. We couldn't find a good place to lean them up, and we are like, we don't need to find a good place to lean them up. There's a big snowdrift. We'll just stick them all in the
Oh,
snowdrift. So,
geez.
so there's a picture of all of our bikes just like standing up, shoved in the snowdrift. So
I'm so glad I don't live in a place that snows year round. I don't know if such a place exists as far as cycling, but, and it's my own fault. I live in Iowa, just like you live in the Midwest, where we've got 4 seasons. Sometimes they come and go at random times, but it's always nice to know that the summer's coming.
no, for sure. Well, in the Midwest, to me, springs in the Midwest are like nowhere else. We just have months and months and months of gray,
Mm-hmm.
and then all of a sudden there's just like that it seems like in a day, where just like everything starts to get to bloom and turn
Yeah.
green, and it's pretty spectacular
Yeah. Yeah.
season change.
Well, okay, so we mentioned you have a quest to pedal 10,000 miles this year, and you are ahead of schedule, as you mentioned. So, how did you come up with 8,000 last year? Like, that's more than most people will get on their bicycle. So, give us a little bit of information about how that came to be.
Yeah, so basically 3 years ago, I got back into cycling after being kind of off the bike for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and had set the goal to do, I think, 5,000 miles. Ended up coming out at about 6.
Wow.
Then I had the idea that I was gonna, for the following year, I was gonna try to do 10,000 kilometers, which is about 6,250 miles or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, I can totally do that. That's pretty much what I did last year. But then again, as I started going, I was like, hey, I'm at a pace. I'm going to keep going. And part of the fun thing about that, I have a pretty good group of people that I ride with around here, and so it's kind of, I don't want to say easy, but it's easier to put on the miles,
Mm-hmm.
when you have, people are always calling you up like, hey man, you want to go for a ride? I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
sure, let's go for a ride. And so I ended up, just from being on a bike a lot, I ended up at about 8,000. And then like I told you, this year, it just happened. It just
Sure.
looked like I was going to be able to do 10,000. The added challenge, though, this year, this pandemic stuff, this stay-at-home stuff, is for the last, whatever, 2.5 months, 2 months, I've been doing all the miles solo.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, people need to do what they think is safe. I'm actually, I have multiple sclerosis myself,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm technically in a risk group. And so, partially the solo riding is a self-preservation thing, and an attempt to not get sick myself,
Mm-hmm.
to protect myself. So I've been doing, all the miles in the last couple of months, and I've been putting on about 1,000 miles a month, for
Wow.
the past couple of months. So.
A quick interruption to tell you this week's sponsor is Thirsty Pigs, a full-service mobile event company offering beer, wine, spirits, plus catering for any indoor or outdoor event. With no events happening these days, you can still support Thirsty Pigs by buying their apparel. Find out more at thirstypigs.com. Now back to the show. So can you imagine when we get to a point where we all feel comfortable group riding again, your miles are going to explode, I would guess.
I hope so. And truthfully, as much as I really enjoy riding solo too,
Mm-hmm.
because it's kind of a nice time it's like meditation to me,
Mm-hmm.
just be on your bike, and, time just disappears. You leave, you get home, whatever, 2.5 hours later, 3 hours later, and you kind of feel like zero time has passed.
Mm-hmm.
However, the other part of it is that I do miss riding with my riding, friends and stuff. There's a fun camaraderie to,
Mm-hmm.
to group riding. And I had mentioned that I have MS, and I know this was a question that we were talking about getting into, but
Mm-hmm.
every year I do the MS 150,
Yeah.
the fundraising ride. The one that I was registered for this year has been postponed.
Mm-hmm.
It was supposed to be the last weekend in June. And it's the same kind of thing. Part of the really special thing about those events is the camaraderie, and so they're moving stuff until later in the summer. People can transfer to do rides, other rides in the area later in the summer. So
Mm-hmm.
hopefully it'll be safe to do that.
Yeah, the longer we go into this and the more events that get canceled or postponed, like I feel like my fall may be jam-packed with events going on.
I was just talking about that with a friend yesterday, because I had registered for, I don't know if you know, there's a gravel race in Michigan that's called the Barry Roubaix.
Okay.
I think it's sponsored by Founders Brewery, but it's a big gravel race, off-road gravel race, and this is the first year that I was going to do it. It's actually a race, And the one that I had registered for was a 62 mile. There's a 100, a 62, and like a 35 or something.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was supposed to be in April, and that got moved till October. And I know there's another one that's a big popular one. It's called the Coast to Coast, which is also in Michigan, where you go from basically from Detroit to Lake Michigan,
Mm.
across the state. And that one's also postponed until October. All these are.
Wow.
So it's going to be a busy fall, like you said.
Yeah, yeah. I hope. Gosh, I hope we're not still talking about this extreme of, social distancing and.
Well, and I think, it's to me, there's two different climates. When you're talking about, competitive events, there's definitely a level of caution that has to be followed.
Sure.
It's different, I think, when you're talking about like a charity event, and especially a charity event like the MS 150, where there's a whole lot of people who are involved in that, who are in a risk group.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sure there's an added part of kind of stress on the part of the organizers to be like, we have a whole bunch of people here that can't be around this.
Right, right,
that can't be exposed to this, and it could be, serious.
right. Do you want to get into a little bit about the MS 150? I think it was called Tour de Farms, if I read it right,
Yep.
that you were or are training for, and maybe just get into a little bit about MS for you and what this ride means.
Yeah. So I'll try to make the long story short.
Okay.
So when I graduated from college in 1996, and when I first graduated from college, me and some buddies got really into cycling. That was kind of when I first got into cycling. And there was a local bike shop who they used to put out a list every year of kind of local centuries and rides and stuff. And we did some of those. We did some great ones. We did Sagbra, which is a week long ride down the lakeshore in Wisconsin.
Hmm.
That was super fun. We did, a bunch of centuries in the area. And the MS 150, which is a 2-day ride, had kind of always been on our radar as something that we wanted to do,
Mm-hmm.
just as a fun physical challenge, and so it was kind of on the list. And then I actually had to stop cycling. I had a health condition. I had a brain tumor, actually.
Mm.
That it was a big deal. The short story of that was that after the surgery, the tumor itself was growing on my vestibular nerve, which is part of the nerve that helps you deal with balance.
Oh, okay.
It was the one on the right side, and so when I came out of surgery, like, I didn't even have the balance to walk.
Ah.
So let alone ride a bike. So I kind of had to give up cycling for a long time. I mean, it was definitely stressful, but life was changing.
Mm-hmm.
I had kids, all that kind of stuff. So I didn't have as much time to be on a bike either. But as my kids got bigger, I wanted to get back into cycling.
Mm-hmm.
About 7 years after the surgery, I had a skin disturbance. I had kind of numbness down one side of my body. The neurosurgeon had me go and do another MRI. They found some evidence of MS, and they sent me to a neurologist. And without going into it, there's a very long and drawn out and complicated process to actually getting a diagnosis of MS itself.
Oh, okay.
It's pretty extensive. But I was finally diagnosed with MS. Actually, because of that, I started getting really into yoga, because there's a bunch of evidence that yoga is good for dealing with MS symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically like the physical symptoms, like muscle. You can get like muscle stiffness, basically kind of like muscle cramps, and so yoga is supposed to help a lot with that. The kind of byproduct of that, though, for me, was that it also really, really helped with my balance.
Oh, sure.
Because of that, I started feeling confident to try getting back on a bike. And so I did. That was, like I said, that was 3 years ago. It felt great. Obviously at that point, like, I had no conditioning to ride a bike. But so that was, I guess, 4 years ago in September. So I ended up riding and riding and riding and riding. The following year, like I said, I did 6,000 miles, and I decided that I was going to do my first MS 150. Because now, for me, it had, like, the meaning of that ride had changed.
Sure.
from being just like a fun physical challenge to like, this is a way that I can raise money for a cause. And it's a way that I can also, for me, kind of prove to myself, not prove to myself, that's probably not the right word, but, uh, that I can challenge myself, to not feel like I have a mess. Now I can't do this. Like,
Mm-hmm.
no, like now I have a mess and damn it, I'm going to do this.
Right. Right. I mean, what an amazing story. I mean, you should be, I don't know. It's amazing, Mark, that you have, where you've come from as far as having a brain tumor and having to relearn probably a lot of things, both physically and mentally. Then having MS come into your life, and then to say, it doesn't matter, I'm still going to get on my bike. And you have gone from 0 miles for how many years to shooting for 10,000. That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, for me, it also really it also really helps me, kind of like we were talking about. It helps you mentally. I mean, it gives you a time to
Mm-hmm.
just kind of calm your mind and just kind of be. And I think that's a really important thing. I mean, I've always been a healthy person. I played sports when I was in high school and, all that kind of stuff. But, fitness has become a little bit more of a, just like general fitness has become a little bit more of a passion of mine.
Mm-hmm.
So like I said, I do yoga and I cycle, I lift weights. There's things that I like that. I try to run. I don't like to run. Um, I've always had in my head that I wanted to try to do a triathlon one day, but it's the running part that I can't. I don't enjoy running. But
I'm right there with you. I actually trained and did a marathon, and I still shake my head every time I think about why I went through all of that training.
well, it's a fantastic goal.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and
to
now
achieve.
it's one and done. So I would much prefer to be on a bicycle, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a few friends that are marathoners, and they describe their mental state when they run, much in the way that I describe my mental state when I ride.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't get there with running. I can't get past feeling I'm thumping along.
Oh, there's so much truth to that. um, A quick interruption to tell you this week's podcast is sponsored by Lizard Lips Lip Balm. These great lip balms contain natural ingredients, come in a variety of flavors, and you can choose certified organic or balms with sun protection. Check it out at lizardlips.net. Now back to the show. Back to cycling, people always ask me to ask people that I interview what kind of bikes they ride. So do you have a few bikes or maybe just one?
Yeah, I have probably more bikes than
Right.
I should have. Well, I actually have, like the road bike that I had from before. Let me back up. So I kind of started getting into cycling as a mountain biker.
Oh, okay.
So I have the mountain bike that I had from when I first started getting into cycling, and it's nothing fancy. It's a Raleigh hardtail mountain bike, front suspension,
Mm-hmm.
and I still ride trail sometimes on that. And then I have the road bike that I had from when I first started riding too, which is also a Raleigh road bike. That was the one that I did like the tour in Wisconsin on and stuff.
Oh, sure.
After, I didn't ride it was 15 years. I didn't ride. When I started getting back into riding, start to notice that like technology has changed.
Mm.
It's like the thing called a gravel bike had not even been invented when I first got into
Right,
cycling.
right.
And so that was actually the first bike that I kind of bought after that was a gravel bike, a Salsa Journeyman gravel bike,
Oh, yes.
which is super fun. I mean, one of the kind of fun things about that is since it's kind of a go anywhere bike, you can like leave the house with no plan, and be like riding along. I was like, hey, I wonder where that road goes, or I
Oh,
wonder
yeah.
where that gravel path goes, or I
Mm-hmm.
wonder where that dirt path goes. Just do your thing and kind of enjoy that. And then this year I bought a road bike, a Cannondale CAD 13, the new one that they
Oh.
just came out with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the one that I've been doing all my road riding on. So
Ex-
yes, I have too many bikes.
yeah. Well, I never ever would ever say that I have too many bikes, but I probably do. I don't know. Yeah. So, you kind of mentioned a little bit about a typical ride, but are you mostly, the gravel bike's more for the fun, and then when you go out every day, you're probably settling up on your road bike.
Yeah, so it's interesting, like I said, I just got back into cycling a few years ago after being off a bike for a long time. And I was truthfully, when I first started getting back into it, kind of nervous about riding trail because mountain bike riding takes a lot of balance and physical
Mm-hmm.
agility and stuff to manage that. So I was kind of nervous to do it. So when I came back to riding, I was doing 100% road riding.
Mm-hmm.
Within the last like year and a half, I've been getting more into trail riding, because I'm feeling more confident about it. But yeah, my most days when if I go down to the basement and where I keep my bikes and I'm like I sort of instinctually grab my road bike.
Right.
That's the one that's my go-to.
Sure. Any adventures that you have been on in the past that you want to share?
I was just thinking about this earlier. I think the one of the I don't know funnest things I think that I've done. This was years ago, many years ago. We went to Winter Park in Colorado,
Mm-hmm.
and with our mountain bikes. And this was in the summer, and there's like hooks on the back of the chairs,
Oh, like
and
the ski chairlifts?
yeah, and
Oh, okay.
you just hook your bike on the chairlift, and you ride the chairlift up to the top, and then ride your bike down the mountain. It was insanely fun.
Wow.
Um, I remember I have some friends who live in Denver, and I remember thinking like, because I had been riding a bunch at that point in time, that I was going to be like in such great shape, and they rode, but they were not as serious about it as I was. They were great. I was dying because the altitude difference, the
Yeah,
elevation
yeah.
difference. Because I think the top of Winter Park is like 15,000 feet or something like that. Chicago is 500 feet.
Right.
And so I was just absolutely dying, but it was so much fun. And at Winter Park, they have a trail that basically like meanders down the mountain. So it's not like pointing yourself straight down the mountain and going crazy. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
just like meander down this trail that comes down the whole mountain. And I'm not sure that you pedal once the whole time,
Oh,
because it's
wow.
because of gravity, but it's all wooded and everything, all down the mountain. Super fun, super
Mm-hmm.
fun.
And I'm assuming that still exists.
It does, it
Yeah.
does. Yeah, and I did one where we did a mountain biking trip also that was in the foothills of the mountains outside of Boise, Idaho.
Oh, okay.
And that's also a really fun one because it's different because it's all like sagebrush desert, so it's very low. And I actually, when the time that I went biking out there had just been a range fire, and so it was like seriously like you felt like you were in like a Mad Max movie or something like that because it's just like burnt,
Wow.
grass and
Yeah.
stuff all around you, and you're riding down this trail. And I'm absolutely not kidding at all. There was a steer skull, like you see in a cowboy
Oh,
movie or something
gosh.
like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
that was on the side of the trail. And it was super fun.
Wow. Well, when you're not biking, and I'm assuming that there are hours in the day when you're not biking, where can you be found as far as, other outdoor sports or working or advocating or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a musician.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm not riding a bike, I'm either playing, composing, or teaching music.
Oh, nice.
That's it's been obviously a little slow right now.
Yeah.
Because our industry is relies a little bit on on being able to congregate, live performances and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. So I guess part of the reason why I've been able to put on so many miles on the bike is we've been on a little bit of a hiatus from live performances. But
Mm-hmm. Have you taken a stab at doing performances via like Zoom meetings yet?
I've not. I play jazz.
Oh, okay.
Jazz is a tricky one because there are a lot of times these videos that you see of bands, they're kind of edited together, and it's really hard to improvise, in that kind of medium because there's with Zoom there's delay
Yes.
So there's that. It's just a different. It works, I think, better for like pop formats. Where you have like a song that you've
Mm-hmm.
practiced in a certain way, and you're reproducing that. I think it's a little bit different in jazz where you're improvising stuff. It just doesn't work as well over Zoom, at least in my experience.
Right. Well, and, your audience is missing out on the obvious, the smells of whatever place they're at and the other background noises and being able to like look around at more than just a computer screen.
Yeah, I mean, and at least, and as a performer, you draw off the energy of the people that are listening to
Oh,
you. So,
sure. Yeah. I didn't even think about that, but that's for sure true.
yeah.
Okay, so back to your 10,000-mile goal. I'm just so I'm excited for you. I hope that you make it. Or actually, I don't hope. I know you will. You'll make it. I can already tell. Any advice you'd give to somebody who, maybe needs a push to say, it doesn't have to be 10,000, but I need to get more miles and I just don't quite know how to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think somebody said to me once, a friend of mine who was actually a racer, he's like, you just need to think of a goal as like that's a whole bunch of 25-mile rides.
Oh, yeah.
And so if for me, I'm not, I don't think in my head, I have to get to 10,000. I try not to obsess about the goal.
Mm-hmm.
I just, get up in the morning and, I like to ride in the morning, and I get up in the morning and I'm like, all right, I'm going to go for a bike ride for a couple hours. And the truth is, like, if you do the math, it's a little less than 200 miles a week, which is 30 miles a day, and so if you think about just like going on your bike for a couple hours, is this kind of part of your routine,
Mm-hmm.
You'll get to 10,000.
And for most people, like you mentioned, the shorter rides, 25 miles or 30 miles, that is a lot more to stomach than going out on a century ride every day.
It is, and I think just in general, at least for myself, I try not to get, with anything that I do, I try not to get obsessed about the goal.
Mm-hmm.
You try to think kind of more about the process. I just think that by default, I enjoy riding the bike. If I get on the bike for whatever, 30, 40 miles every day, 10,000 will be the end result. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the feeling better mentally and physically after a bike ride is something that I definitely enjoy about every ride that I'm on.
yeah. And I think that, whether cycling or not is your sport of choice or not, your exercise of choice or not. I mean, there's tons of psychological evidence that those endorphins are great for trying to deal with feelings of depression or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Especially in a time like now, where we're all feeling not 100% mentally,
Right.
because of things that are going on in our world. I think it's a good thing, at least that I know that I can do for myself,
Mm-hmm.
to feel better.
And I'm just so excited for you, knowing your past a little bit and knowing that 4 years ago, you probably weren't thinking about a bicycle ride like you do today.
No, it's true.
Yeah, that's just great.
Fundraising for that MS-150, like I said, what I'm planning on is riding 150 miles the weekend that the ride was supposed to be.
Oh, sure.
But then they're also, one of the really pretty wonderful things that Bike MS people have made possible is that you can transfer your registration to other rides in the area.
Oh, okay.
And so if it turns out that fall rides are happening, you can go and you can ride. There's one near Indianapolis. There's one near St. Louis. There's one in Milwaukee. So there's some other rides kind of in the not too far away area, from Chicago that you could do.
Mm-hmm. So you can find out how to support the MS-150 in the show notes and specifically for Mark's account as well. Well, Mark, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It was really nice to get to know you, and I'm looking forward to seeing something on social media that says, yep, I did it. I did 10,000 miles this year.
Oh, thank you.
Well, thanks for being on the show.
All right, thank you.
Well, that's it for this week. Thank you so much, Mark, for sharing your story. You can donate to Mark's MS fundraising page by using the link in the show notes. If you have a topic or the name of a cyclist you find interesting, email me at MurphologyPodcast@gmail.com. Of course, you can go to Murphology Podcast to find good info, and I recently launched a YouTube channel. So if you want to see videos of the places I bike, check that out. I'll leave you with this quote from the Unwritten Book of Murphology. This quote comes from Walt Disney. "All our dreams can come true if we have the courage to pursue them." Think about it.